welcome to my channel or back to my channel. Today I want to discuss sort of like some of the books that I've been reading lately, and I kind of wanted to relate it back to sort of like my film and media studies degree. And so these are some of the books that I've been reading lately and maybe some of their film or TV equivalent in case you're interested in reading them. Hello, my name is Jerry and I come here and I talk about books. I also have other interests as well, like raving and music and fashion, so follow along. So these are some of the books that I've been reading for the past couple of months. Some of them fall into different categories. A lot of them are thrillers and more of like a darker, twisted mystery psychological thriller. And so that's kind of the direction that I've been reading a lot, especially through audio. A lot of these books I read through audiobook, whether it's Spotify or Libby, which is an app where you can listen to or read books from the library. I've been doing that a lot. So yeah, that's where a lot of these books I listen to are from. So by further ado, let's get to, I guess it's more like a kind of a reading wrap up, but also like, because it's kind of like a reading wrap up, but at the same time, these are just books that I've been reading for the past couple of months. But a lot of these I actually read during the month of March. And also, hopefully very soon, once we get our cat to finally use the bathroom in the right place, I get to have my own filming room coming up soon. So hopefully I can film some things in there coming up soon, as well as show the process of decorating that room. Currently I'm in what is considered to be my boyfriend's office. So it's full of just like cords and like engineering type stuff. So hopefully I get to have my own space soon as we get the cat figured out in this new place. But yeah, without further ado, here are some of the books that I've been reading lately. So one of the recent books that I finished that I kind of talked about a couple of videos ago, I got it from the library, and it's called Falling by TJ Newman. I have my notes over here in case you see me looking. And it's a thriller, kind of fast paced. Basically, the back of the book kind of gives you very little information. But the book follows a pilot who has to make a choice. He could either crash the plane and save his family, which kills everybody on board, including himself, or he chooses to save the plane and his family ends up dying. And so it's basically a terrorism attack that is happening on board of this plane. So the pilot has to make this decision of who he's going to save. So I ended up giving this book about 3 stars, 3.25, but mostly I think it's probably a 3-star of a book. Shows that I think kind of like are similar to this book is like the show 24, if you've ever watched it, or the movie 7500 or something like that. And I call it related to these types of things because it all is dealing with terrorism. And the positives of this book is the author is a former flight attendant. So what she does such a good job of is going into detail of what it would be like to be on a plane during a terrorism attack. Whether it is what the pilot would be experiencing, what the flight attendants would do to try to help, procedures and stuff that they drill into flight attendants' heads whenever it comes to situations like this. And I think that's what the book does well. Unfortunately, and why I gave this book 3 stars, is it also falls into some Islamophobia tropes. That's why I kind of related it to like the show 24, is it does sort of put the same type of stereotypes when it comes to when Americans think of the word terrorism, especially after 9/11. And so what I have a problem with a lot of these stories, and I know that it's probably difficult to tackle these stories in today's modern age of talking about terrorism, is the problem with continuing to put these kinds of narratives and stories out there is that it tends to link terrorism to a certain group of people, which then has real world implications. Real world implications of people facing racism or discrimination because of where they're from or how they look. And so continuing to put people who are from the Middle East as being terrorists or being people who are so willing to do these big acts of terror continues to, for a lot of people, cause real world harm. And so I think that she does try to, in the end, give a lot of sympathy to the two men, spoiler alert, the two men who were committing the terrorist act. She does try to do that. But at the same time, it's hard for you to give sympathy for them because of the act that they're trying to do. And it's very hard to want to see their side when you know that they're wanting to kill these mass amounts of people. And so I get what she was trying to do, but at the same time, it still falls on those very harmful tropes, and that is why I gave it a 3-star. I would recommend it, but I will say also this book does feel a little dated, and I'm just not sure exactly. I mean, the book when I was at the library was recommended, and I can see why. It's fast-paced, it's well-paced, and it definitely keeps you hooked the entire time because you want to know how it's going to end. Some of the tropes of the terrorists, I think, were just a little too stereotypical. Another book that I read, which this author has now become one of my auto-buy authors, and that was The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. This book I gave 5 stars. I read it through audio, and it definitely saved me on those long road trips that I have to do for work. So it's more like a YA thriller, horror thriller book. It sort of follows the story of Carrie. So have you ever seen the movie Carrie? Or I think there's a book, I'm not sure. Have you ever seen the movie Carrie? It follows that same premise of a girl who's being bullied, but she's also at the same time as she's being bullied and also going through all of these challenges of becoming an adult or becoming a woman, also dealing with supernatural powers, but also having an abusive parent in the picture as well that is also influencing their upbringing. And so it still follows the premise of Carrie, but what Tiffany D. Jackson does is she adds conversations about race and class in there. The book takes place in a town where it is so deeply racist, and like a modern age deeply racist, that they have had segregated proms for like forever, and they're still having segregated proms until one day an incident happens and the school has to rehabilitate its reputation so that people won't think that a bunch of racists come from the school. And so they choose to integrate their prom, and chaos ensues from there, from there. Tiffany D. Jackson does such a good job of making her stories so three-dimensional. This book discusses things like bullying and racism and class. Another thing that I would relate this book to is the film Get Out. Jordan Peele does such a good job of blending real life horror with the horror that's happening within the story. And I think Tiffany D. Jackson also does such a good job of doing that. It shows the horror of the story itself, of Carrie, of this girl who is labeled, who was bullied and is now getting revenge on all of those who had harmed her, and also using these supernatural powers that almost sort of label her a monster. But then also blending the actual real horror of racism, the horror of having to deal with being a person of color in America, especially in some of these smaller towns that deal with so much overt racism and have such a hard time with change. And I think Tiffany does such a good job of blending those two things together, where even though you kind of know what's going to happen because you've seen Carrie, you're also very intrigued by how the real life horror of racism is going to play out within this story. And I think it is done so exceptionally well. I would recommend this book to anyone. I would 100% recommend it through audio. There's like a cast of characters that reads this story, and it feels like you're just listening to a play. I think this book is just exceptional and well done, and Tiffany D. Jackson is an auto-buy author that you should definitely check out. The next book I read through audio was The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. I gave this book about a 4.25 stars. It's a thriller, mystery, very dark type of book. It opens with a very challenging scene that was a lot to listen to, but I think the book overall is pretty good. That's why I gave it 4.25 stars. Movies and shows that I would kind of relate it to is The Lincoln Lawyer. If you've ever seen it, I think it has like Matthew McConaughey in it. That film is very dark, but it also surrounds this like legal and court and, you know, things happening in personal lives, and I think it kind of relates to The Good Daughter. So this book follows two sisters after they experienced a very, very tragic and traumatizing event when they were teenagers. And it sort of like follows that story, but then it also sort of cuts to them as adults and them dealing with a lot of that trauma, as well as they're both lawyers. And so of course, with a book about lawyers, there's things about cases and stuff like that. And so there's a really big case that sort of like brings them back together and brings them back to that same place that the big tragic event happened. It brings them together, but also forces them to deal with what happened to them and the things that they maybe didn't say at the time, or things that they kept to themselves at the time because they were so young and they were trying to protect themselves. So that's kind of the general description. I don't want to give too much away because I think this book, the best part about it is what it chooses to reveal over time. The positives of this book. Now this book is quite long. I didn't realize it as I was like listening to the book, but this book is quite long. And I would say for a book that's this long, what Karen Slaughter does is she's going to keep your attention the entire time. The pacing is well done. I was never bored while reading this book. I love how Karen Slaughter makes these characters really feel like real people. I feel like sometimes in thrillers, some characters sort of feel like they're just there to cause chaos, or sometimes the character development is very shallow. In this one, I think that she does such a good job with character development where you really feel like you are listening to people's journal or diary entries, and I think it's well done. I would say, back to some of the more dark elements of the book, trigger warning for things like SA, death of a parent, detailed depictions of violence, and gun violence. And that's some of the things that is dealt with in that book. So if you are interested in reading it, I definitely recommend it, but definitely heed some of those trigger warnings. Some of them can be quite dark. Why did I not give it 5 stars? Well, there is a subplot. I wish there was more time to sort of like delve into that second subplot just a little bit. I understand that like the book wasn't really about that, what was the subplot. It was more about the trauma of these two sisters, and so I get that. But at the same time, I feel like the subplot was sort of like wrapped up kind of fast, and I felt like I wanted to kind of like sit with it a little bit more of what was the aftermath. But overall, I think this book is really good, and I would also recommend it through audio. The voice actors for this book do such an exceptional job, and you really feel like you're listening to so many different voices when it's only 2 women. I think this book is really good, and I would definitely recommend it. I'm noticing that I'm recommending or talking about a lot of thrillers, and I think it's because I love to listen to thrillers through audio. I feel like sometimes with romance, I find myself kind of like not paying attention, so I tend to like read romance in physical and then listen to thrillers when I'm like on long road trips. So that tends to be like the direction that I go in. So I think that's why there's a lot of thrillers, because I finished a lot of thrillers because I'm on the road so much. So I finished a lot of thrillers, if you noticed, but I did read some romance. I just haven't finished any of the romance ones. So the next book I'm going to talk about is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby, who has now also become an auto-buy author. His writing is just so poetic, but also has this like southern, I don't know how to describe it, like this like southern colloquialism that he goes into that I think is like very real for these characters who are supposed to be in these small town southern areas. I think he does that exceptionally well. All the Sinners Bleed, of course, I gave it 5 stars. It's more of a mystery thriller. Movies and TV shows that I would kind of related back to is like Black Klansman, or I related back to Prisoners because of some of the other darker things that happen in this book. I think that both of those would be kind of not so close to equivalent of this book, but more in that direction. This book follows a Black cop who is the sheriff in a very deeply racist small town. I don't know if you're noticing a theme here, but so a deeply racist small town. through this event, some darker things that are happening within the town are uncovered. And while these things that are happening are being uncovered within the town, we start to see that there is some very deep-rooted, disturbing things that are happening in this town. And it is this cop's journey to uncover some of those things, basically changing this town forever. So this book was very dark, deals with things like SA, child exploitation. I can't really go into more detail, but I'm guessing you're kind of understanding the direction, sort of like going in that direction of this book. And I think it is done so well, and S.A. Cosby deals with these topics in such a very realistic way, in the way that he gives a lot of sensitivity to these topics, as well as, you know, talking about the sort of inner turmoil of being a Black cop in today's world, right? Being a Black cop, dealing with actual racism and Black people's distrust of police officers. And he also delves into that as well, which is something that I really appreciated that he did do, because I think that sometimes when we see certain stories and narratives of like cops who are people of color, they tend to like lightly brush over the fact that there is this like push and pull of being a minority, but also being in a position within an organization that a lot of Black people have had issues with. So I think that he does such a good job with showing this character's inner turmoil of being a Black cop. This book blends discussions about race, class, policing, and justice, and what is justice in a world that a lot of the time doesn't give people who deserve it actual justice. The story is dark and it keeps you guessing the entire time. While I was reading this book, I wanted to kind of know who S.A. Cosby was. And so I watched some of his interviews. In one of the interviews, he says that, sorry, I'm reading all my notes over here. He says that the way that he writes men in his books is they have sort of a tragic masculinity. I think we all know about what toxic masculinity is, but he writes his characters as having sort of a tragic masculinity, which I thought was really interesting. Is essentially tragic masculinity, from what he says, is these men know what they should do. These men know what is right, whether it's going to therapy or treating the people around them right, or they know exactly what they should be doing. But ultimately they choose to still go with their vices. They still choose to do the things that they shouldn't be doing. Or when they do choose to finally get their act together, it's sometimes too late, which definitely I think delves more into his other book, Razorblade Tears, which I just finished as well. It's like they know what they should be doing right, but it's like they always are gonna fall back into those vices of still doing wrong. And then when they finally do sort of get it together, sometimes it's too late. I thought that was really interesting, because it is true. I think a lot of his male characters in his books have this sort of tragic male masculinity thing going on, where they're not toxic per se, but well, some of them might be, but they're not toxic per se, but there definitely are people who are striving to be better, but ultimately some of those vices just still come back to the forefront, and they get punishment for those vices, but at the same time, it's like they know what they need to be doing, they just don't do it. Compared to toxic masculinity, where it is sort of this feeling that they are justified for doing the things that they do. I recommend this book to anybody who loves true crime. I think that I've put a lot of my former listening to true crime a lot. I've put a lot of that into reading books like these. The story is gripping, tragic, and will leave you wanting more. Right after finishing this book, I had to go and buy Razorblade Tears, and I thought it was also such a great book, but I'll discuss that one in another video. I've been book shopping a lot lately, and so I have a couple more books that I've added to my very long list of a TBR. I've got Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. So this one I think is like a horror. I don't know much about it, but I hear a lot of people kind of like relate this to a little bit more to a thriller, but I think it's in the horror section. Books I got recently. I got another Tiffany D. Jackson book. I've actually read this book, but I wanted to buy the physical copy so I can tab it and read it again because I love this book so much. It's called Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I couldn't recommend this book enough. She's just such an amazing writer, and I hope to own all of her books one day. Another one is one that tends to be people's favorite, and that is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. I saw the second book and I just think everyone's been raving about how good it is. I read Long Shot and really loved it. I don't know why I haven't picked up another book of hers, but I'm going to start reading this one soon. And then this one is again another reread. This is one of the books that I had on my favorite books of 2023, and that is Happy Place by Emily Henry. As you can see, I've already started reading it. I've already started tabbing it too. It's another book that I want to just own the physical copy so then I can tab it. I have the hardcover, but I wanted the paperback because I just like to really own things. And so that's what I got this one, and I'm going through it, tabbing it, and hopefully this will be in a video in the future. And then another book that I got the Magnolia Park series. I've been seeing these books all over my For You page, and I was just like, I need to know what all the hype is about. I've seen people crying, I've seen people excited. I need to know what this book is for myself. So I got the entire series. Why do I get the entire series of things? I don't know. And then another two books that are coming in the mail is Bride by Ali Hazelwood, because I joined a book club and that's one of the first books that they're reading. Actually, to get a move on and finish that book soon because book club is Thursday. And then another thriller. Yeah, those were all of the books that I've read recently, as well as some new ones that I have added to my collection. Have you read any of these books? Do you like any of them? Do you think you're gonna read any of the ones that I talked about so far? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.